Hello and welcome to another edition of In Between the Pages with James Lott Jr. Who am I? I'm James Lott Jr. here on JLJ Media, my online network. There were 35 shows from Star Wars to being left-handed and the soap operas. But this show, we talk about books, talk about writing, the art of writing, what people are writing about, what books you should be reading. I have all of that for you today. This person can actually, I was just saying before we got on camera, can actually say, I knew James Lott Jr. before he went Hollywood. We've known each other nearly, let's just say nearly 20 years. Let's just round it up. It's been since the mid 2000s. We both lived in San Francisco and did some jobs together. And we kept in touch, like most do, on social media. So when he said, I got a book coming out, I was like, well, let me talk to him about his book. We read it and talk to him about it and see what's going on. So we're going to talk about Emergent. That's the book. We'll talk to him. So I'm going to give you his little brief bio. He earned a master's degree at the City College of New York, where he studied Latinx magic, realist, and African-American literature. He worked as an educator in South Korea, which I knew him when he was doing that. He's been all over the country. And so we're going to talk about this and his book that he has out now. Help me welcome my friend and author, Nicholas Holmberg. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, James? Good to see you again.
Same here. It's always a trip for me to touch people who knew me from before. I'm like, this is kind of fun. I get to actually talk business and shop with you in a different way than before. But this would have been like before we had coffee or drinks, talk about your book. Now I actually talk to you about your book on camera.
For sure.
So now, where are you based right now? So folks know where you are. Where are you based right now?
I am in the Middle West, right in the middle of Iowa. It's at Des Moines. So lots of action here for various different reasons.
Folks, longtime folks who know me know that I have a big connection to Des Moines, Iowa. When I was working at my last job before I came to Hollywood, she did some work for me. We ran conferences, ag conferences in Des Moines, Iowa. So I have friends there. I literally have friends in Clive, West Des Moines. I love my Taco Johns, my potato olays. I'm all about, trust me, we used to fly to Minneapolis and then fly down into Des Moines, this little tiny airport. I know it's Des Moines International Airport, so people from Des Moines don't get mad at me, but because they fly to Canada or whatever. But I have a big connection to Des Moines, actually.
When was the last time you were here?
I was there before the pandemic, actually. I was there in 2019. I came through because I was coming through. I used to live in Pittsburgh for a while. I had a home in Pittsburgh. And I said, I'm gonna drive cross country. So me and some friends drove cross country, which I tell people, you should try it. It really is. We have a beautiful country, first of all, but every state is very interesting. And I've done it several times now. So if you have the time, just drive cross country.
I did a couple of trips from Chicago to California and back, or vice versa, depending on where I was living at the time. But it's pretty amazing drive. I'd love to do the full country but trying to get off that Interstate 80 and try to do some side roads or something. That's really where the real stuff is at.
So for me, I have friends and family just about everywhere. So I always I try to market that way too. So I can go, I'm gonna go visit so-and-so for it, and it breaks up the trip. I say again, if you have the time, folks. I know a lot of people don't have the time. But I had the time to do it. And so I was like, we were coming through, we had to stop in Des Moines. I just have to. I went there and I had a good time, saw some old friends. And we used to do conferences there every year, our ag conferences, and they drew a lot of people, actually. So I have a soft spot for Des Moines, Iowa. They even have a gay bar there, folks. They have a gay bar. They had several. Blazing Saddles was one of them. They have several.
There's a couple in Davenport as well.
Yeah, and there is. I know the Midwest. And I actually like Iowa. I'll tell you, people, a lot of people, there are really nice people in the Midwest. I'll tell you. Midwest is a bad rap. It's a bad rap all the time.
Well, it's like any other place, man. I mean, there's just a wide variety of experiences that come from all different parts of the socioeconomic spectrum. I mean, that's the same here in Iowa. It's a little bit wider than places in the past. But here in Des Moines, it's actually a little bit more reflective of what's going on in the rest of the country demographically. So I feel much more at home here since I've lived in New York. I lived in Houston before I lived here. I lived in a super international city of Seoul, which has a huge international population there. And of course, growing up in the Central Valley, it was kind of the similar Iowa feel to it. Larger population is whiter and Christian and all of that. But once you go down to where I went to school, which is at San Jose State University, I mean, that was an eye opener for me coming from the suburbs of Central California, basically orchard land. And that was a real eye opener for me because I really hadn't left home up until the age of 18. And then when I was, after that until now, I'm 45, I've moved over 30 times. So it's just insane.
Yeah, that's because my uncle Tommy was a professor at San Jose State for years, philosophy.
Okay.
Tommy Lott. But I was just saying, because even in the book, you mentioned cities that never really get mentioned, like Delano and Hanford. Like, I know what they are when I was reading the book. There are a lot of people like, where's that? You said Fresno, they'd be like, okay, no, Fresno. You say Bakersfield, they know that, which you do mention Bakersfield in the book. But when you were like Delano and you said Hanford, I'm like, well, you mention cities nobody ever talks about in books half the time.
That's funny. You should mention that particular scene in the book. I mean, Delano is a hugely important city in terms of the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. That, I mean, I obviously took, a lot of liberties with that particular scene, but my dad did a little bit of missionary work back in the 60s and down there with his, he did Catholic school all the way through.
Yeah.
He went down there, I think, as a junior or senior in high school. And, he actually met Cesar Chavez, who is a kind of in the background of the whole book, So, but, we had one little story. And then I just kind of, took a lot of license there with my fiction writer license.
Yes, but you can't have dramatic license. You can do what you want.
Yep.
But it was just funny. Just saying, when I was reading, there were things you were mentioning that I'm like, either you have to be from this area or know about to actually mention those particular cities or areas. And also, what's fun with this book, I'm going to tell you about. Well, we'll get there in a second. I have so many things I want to say, but this book does seem reflective of your studies and where you lived. And I was going to say, because you just mentioned how you've lived in these big multicultural cities like Houston, like New York, like Bay Area, and everything. How are you handling Iowa then? Because do you like the slower pace? Are you like, okay, you have all this knowledge, and you're living in a city that's like not that bad, but just like it's not what you've lived before. Yeah,
nobody ever asked me that question. Not in the same way, at least. With contextualizing everything, and I kind of got to the age of what was it? I moved here a couple of years ago, so I was 43. It just felt like I was getting tired, man. So when the opportunity came up to move here, once my wife started her job, her practice, we have a niece and a nephew across town, and I missed a lot of that when I was doing all my other traveling and living, because all my family's still in Northern California. And so it was like a second chance for me. So that's really cool. All my other nieces and nephews from California are kind of grown up now, and things change, and we'll reconnect once they're out of college or something like that. But I still keep in touch with them. But it's just so nice to be involved in like the real young kids' lives again, and take another shot at getting them involved in baseball and getting them interested in reading and and writing eventually. But just, man, they keep me young for sure. So that's one of the great things about being here. But on a larger scale, just being, this place is, from a political standpoint, it's a flashpoint. I mean, it's maybe flashpoint's a bit dramatic term to use, but a lot of politicians come through here, and it keeps things interesting. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of really good organizations around here to get involved in, and to help make Iowa better for everybody. It's not just about one group or the other. We've got to find room for everybody here. And I think Des Moines is a good place to start. And then there's a couple hours from here, there's, University of Iowa, and that Twin Cities area there is just got a lot of good groups, a good good kind of feel to it as well. So
yeah, they do. So now I want to ask you this because I don't know what this is. I mean, I went to college myself and I have some degrees, but I don't know what this is. So I like to ask questions. That's what education never stops. So, so, but you said it says you studied Latinx magic realist. Like, I don't know what is that? Can you explain what that is?
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, we got the term realism in there, but so a lot of the writers that were writing, white writers that were writing back, probably throughout most of time until other groups of people started getting more of a slice of the literary world. White writers were writing mainly in realist ways. And so magic realism comes along as kind of a response to that. It's kind of got its roots in, I would say, post-colonialism. So looking at the world through the perspective of folks who have in the past been marginalized because of colonialism. But the magic part of it is just kind of, it blurs the lines between what is real, what is not, truth, fiction, all those things. And if there's magic parts in it, I mean, there's, most recent example is the Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. He just played with that form throughout the entire time. I mean, he literally used the Underground Railroad, and it was a literal thing in his book, but we all know that it was just kind of a name for a network of systems that helped do its job. But, he was using that as a method of time travel and things like that. Octavia Butler has also, she's a little bit more towards the science fiction stuff, but the time travel stuff is, what was it? The one I just read recently, but she was just time traveling between like 1970s LA to like 250 years previous, and she was just having to experience the life of the enslaved peoples, and then just having to go back and just kind of deal with all that. It was just such a trip of a book. But it has its kind of these elements of kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say confusion, but disorientation is probably the better term for it. Because the characters, remain the same, but they just kind of jump through and find themselves in these different situations or different times, and just can be really, it can do some really incredible things with the reader's mind. Let's put it that way, and it gives a lot of freedom to the writer to do a lot of different things. And I'll be clear with you here. I mean, that my book is categorized in that sense, it's more because there are elements of it, but I wouldn't call the book magic realist at all. But the influence is definitely there.
Your book is dreamy.
Dreamy. Tell me more.
It feels like, I was telling you, your every chapter feels like a new story. And what I mean by that is sometimes chapters are, when you're taking us on a journey, obviously, through the whole book. You get that. And it's in a way it's going. But some books, the chapters feel almost literally just directly from, this is chapter 1, now this is chapter 2. Like, it's literally, the story's picking up where that left off, and this story's picking up where that left off, and the story, like, and nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. I'm just saying that some books seem like they follow that. Or some books jump around, where it's like, here's where we are today. Next one, now we're 10 years ago. Let me show you this. And it's a stark difference. It's almost jittery sometimes. Your books seem to flow for me when I was reading it, but it felt like I was reading a whole new, almost a different book sometimes, in a good way, the next chapter. But as you're reading it, you are tying it into the major story in mass. But it almost felt like it was like Catherine was going through a dream. Like, it was like she was dreaming, like, because you had to go different time period. There was different things going on, but it just, I don't know. That's the word I wrote down, dreamy. That's when I was writing. I take notes sometimes. I'm writing stuff, and I was like, this felt very I'll use my notes on here too. I was like, I felt very, just felt like, I didn't want to say, it doesn't feel ethereal, like about that, like that kind of, not light and airy, just felt like it was like, I feel like I was in her dreams. Like she was walking through the world as a dream, so to speak, trying to get to this. I don't give too much away in the book. I'm going to read the book, but I just felt like that's what it felt like. For me, that's the only word that comes to mind, that came to mind to me early, halfway through the book. It was like, I feel like I'm in her dreams, and she's dreaming these scenarios about what happened here, what happened to her dad, and I felt like that's what I felt like.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on, actually. The way that the one sentence that I've come up with this for, the Emergent is like a series of psychological mysteries.
Yes.
And
very psychological, folks. No, seriously. I mean that in a great way. Like, it's very psychological book.
And kind of as an aside, it makes it kind of like a little hard to talk about the book because there's so many layers to it, and I don't want to give away too much, but series of psychological mysteries. The story opens at the dawn of the internet era, and all the weight that carries, and it's first person narrative from a 19-year-old's perspective in the Silicon Valley. She's got no remaining family at the beginning of the book. So what the hell's going on there? So you got to read on to figure out.
I had to laugh because there are things you mentioned in the book. I was writing that stuff. You mentioned Discman, TV, VCRs. I mean, you mentioned Alice in Chains and one thing. I was like, all these things. I'm like, oh, I like that. Oh, I know that. I mean, like, you're mentioning things in the book that made me kind of smile. That was right down there. And it was first person, which I like first. I haven't read a first person book in a while. And so some of my questions right now basically have to do with the book. We're not gonna give away too much, of course. We want people to, it's the point of him being on here. He's trying to sell books. Like, go out there and buy it. But anyway, first of all, so it's very Latinx. First of all, there's also that too in there. I'll make sure I mention that. So now, knowing your background, knowing that you lived all over, because you lived a very multicultural life, and then you have multicultural studies. So my first, actually, before we get to the book, what drew you to that? I always wonder when white people go to multiculturalism, I'm always very curious about that. I love it. I'm always just very curious. Was it where you grew up? Was it? I mean, what influences got you that those were your studies?
I think it's kind of a reaction to where I grew up. It's a response, because once I did move out at the age of 18, oh my gosh, that was years ago.
Yes.
It's just amazing how, I look back and I'm like, wow, that was a long time ago.
A blink of an eye.
I hadn't done any travel. I knew San Jose, which is the setting of the main setting of the book. I knew San Jose because I went there a lot as a kid. I had family on both sides there in that city, so I was pretty familiar with certain neighborhoods. But then I moved there as an 18-year-old with a hell of a lot more freedom to explore and, kind of do my own thing. And that really, that was the beginning of my eye-opening journey, which, quite honestly, still continues to this day. But, I think, that is one part of it. But, if I, go back on other parts of my life, like I said, kind of grew up in the white suburban area, the ever infringing suburbia on the Orchard. So the beauty of the area was kind of being infringed upon. So I kind of use that in my mind. That's just kind of a metaphor and symbolic for, coming of age or, growing up, or, come what may. And, I didn't really read much as a kid. So I didn't read much as a kid. So, I think when I was a kid, I would much rather have acted out my stories and, just playing outside rather than sit inside and read a boring book. And, it took me a while to get around to that, but I'm a Cold War kid. So I grew up playing Army men out front. I was also into sports. So I was always imagining that bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, bases loaded, down by 3 situation. But I also had these influences in my family that were teachers. I had a couple of, let's see, 3 teachers in my family, 4 teachers in my family, on either side of my family. So, and I had, saw them quite frequently. So they kind of had that influence. There's readers everywhere in my family. My grandparents were big readers. My brother was always reading. My dad himself was an English major. Went to San Francisco UCSF back in the 60s. So he's got some stories.
Yes, he does. I'm sure he does.
Lots of travelers in my family too. So I think that the influence of the teachers, the readers, and the travelers really started to intrigue me as I got older, and it kind of planted the seed. Then, as I said before, I went off to SJSU, and I started I still had a pretty poor reading habit, but I went there to learn how to write. That was my intention all along. I just did not get into the reading bit until I, got my ass handed to me in the first couple of semesters of the rigors of university life. Yeah. And it took a few semesters to get that GPA back on track, I'll tell you. Because all the freedoms that go along with that, and I wasn't a very good student in high school. I was kind of more the jockey type of guy, but for whatever reason, just because of the reasons I stated before, I just really got into the idea of writing, and quite honestly, it may have been just the romance of being a writer. Just the idea of being a Steinbeck or a Hemingway, and living that writer life, which is, still a dream, but in a different way now. I'm not going to be going off and fighting bulls or, joining any.
Or drinking yourself to death.
Right. Or that. Living in San Jose, my brother was finishing up school at the time at San Jose State. So we always had stuff to talk about as my mind was just opening up to this new world of literature and writing and learning to write, really, quite honestly. I had to, and this is a story I used to tell my students when I was teaching ESL for about 10 years previous to this life that I'm living now. But I had to remediate in writing when I got to school, because I didn't even test well into writing. So, and I won't fault anybody but my own work ethic,
Right, no, right.
And I had to have some hard conversations with myself and my patrons, my parents, and my shit out. So sorry.
It happens to us. It's my company. You can say it.
So it was great that my brother was there, because he was big into letters. He studied French literature and philosophy. So he was a big influence at that time. It was just really good to bounce ideas off of him in terms of writing and literature. And then, I started working too a little bit more. I had jobs as a busser. I waited tables. I attended bar for 2 years in downtown San Jose. And, that was kind of a pretty unique and pretty great observation. All of those were great observation posts for some wannabe writer like me back then.
Oh, yeah.
And then right in the middle of school, I did a couple of solo months on the road, saving money from my busing and waiting jobs. And I actually took buses and trains back from New York through about 10 different cities and made my way back over a couple months. And here's a little fun fact. I did all that in $2,000.
Well, you can be done. I believe it. I don't believe it.
Yeah, but it's harder to do these days. I'll tell you that.
Now, we're talking years ago, but you can do stuff like that. I know that actually can be happening.
Yeah. So by the time, just to kind of wrap up your question, but by the time I finished San Jose State, I full-blown addiction to reading and writing. And then in 2003, other things intervened, but finally in 2003, I moved to New York City because I had visited there one time before when I was, in 19, and when I skipped out on school for a semester. I was just like, I have to live here. So the only way I can really live there is if I had some reason to be there. And so school was it. And I figured, well, I'm going to go get into this creative writing program at City College. And obviously another great observation post. I had a couple more waiting jobs, and just the freedom to walk the streets of Manhattan.
Oh yeah.
I also did some teaching there at the university, scared out of my mind because I was basically just out of undergrad and I'm teaching undergrads. And that was just like,
yeah,
wow.
I love it.
I'll probably write a book someday about my teaching experiences.
Yeah, you have a lot of them. So yes, you could.
Yeah. And, all that, it just expanded my exposure to the different voices in literature and to real people, just a variety of people. And just, you've been in New York, I'm sure, that there's just everywhere you go, there's different groups of people and different kinds of people that have that potential to influence you. And certainly if it was just me observing or talking with people or reading more widely, I really think that those were the basis. And then everything else that came after, of course, continued to influence me.
Yeah, my mother's from New York.
Long learner, definitely.
Yeah, my mother's from New York, so I know how every street can be a little different in New York. You could have a bunch of Puerto Ricans on one block, Dominicans on the other, West Indians on the other, Italian on the other. New York's my magic city. I love New York. I know it inside and out. It's my favorite cities in the world. I think everyone should go. But I'll tell you, folks, I went to Houston for a conference, to speak at a conference, and I know it's the fourth largest city in America. I had no idea. Once I got there, it reminded me a lot of LA. I was like, all the traffic and the freeway. I was like, it was very diverse. I was like, wow, I had no idea. And some good barbecue too. But I had no idea. So it's funny you're talking about that these different parts of the country that can influence you, and what you are and what you do and what you study. And ironically, you're a great example of someone who didn't grow up writing since they were 5 years old. You always see these stories. I writing since I was 5, and that's why I have these books now. It's like, no, you're somebody who was totally somewhere else in terms of education. End up writing a book. I mean, that's an amazing thing. And so that's what next question leads right in, a great segue into this. When made you decide to write a book?
Well, a lot of the reasons that I, kind of just touched upon, it's just, being exposed to a wider world. But, in my undergrad, I started to realize that reading, it seems so obvious to say it now, and you know this, anybody who reads books knows this.
Yes.
I realized that, how much reading expands your sense of empathy. So I asked myself when I went to school, actually, before I even started, when I was writing my application story for graduate school, I asked the question, why can't writing be an act of empathy as well? So I wrote this story, and you've read the book. There's a scene early in the book that has changed over time, but it's still there now. There's a lot that I've cut out over the years, but it's the scene of the party at the very beginning. And originally my character, so I wanted to imagine what it was like to be, first of all, a female in a male-dominated world, and a bisexual woman who is living in a heteronormative world. And so I just kind of ran with that, Can I pack this into my application? I had no idea that it was going to become the first part of the first chapter of the book. So the main character kind of demanded that I write that first person perspective to really get into it. And then, it's just kind of implicit in all this is what is it like to be afraid to be yourself in front of friends and especially of family? And so the theme of identity is obviously inherent in this, without any really broad, I don't really have a platform necessarily.
Right.
I don't necessarily have any political aims with this, but it's identity is a universal theme throughout literature. And it's, something that has been questioned for thousands of years in many different ways. And coming of age was an obvious way to tell this kind of story. But I would hardly say that I could be classified as strictly coming of age, but there's strong elements of it.
Total elements of it in the book, yes. Totally.
Right, because of the area, because of the age that the character is. So I finished the first 100 pages in 2004. And by the time I finished my, you're gonna laugh at this, because I know you've written a few books, but by the time I finished my first full draft, I had 170,000 words in 2010. So it took me a while to get there. There's a couple intervening years that I had to take off for life stuff, but but over that time, the world changed a lot because of the internet. And speaking of, the whole issue of identity, the internet changed that as well.
Yeah.
Then, like I said, life intervened for about 6 years, and I actually didn't write it. After I finished that draft in 2010, I didn't write or work on it again for 6 years because I had to work,
Yep.
help support my wife through her graduate school. I went back to school.
Yes.
There were a couple of rejections from publishers and agents throughout all that, because I said, well, I have this, so I might as well try to put it out there. But 170,000 words, I don't think so.
Yeah, right.
That's equivalent to probably about 400 pages, and there's no way in hell the industry is going to give that much space to a rookie writer.
No, not at all.
So, but by the time 2017 rolls around, I identified that I had a little bit of space in my life, or I needed to make space. My character started talking to me again. And she was saying, you have to keep writing this, because of what was and still is going on from a social and political standpoint. This book really, she really demanded that I take a closer look at the aims of this book. And oddly enough, my character demanded that I take on even more aspects of identity that are not mine. And I'm going to just go ahead and leave it there, because I want the reader to go ahead and.
Yeah, I know. It's like I can say stuff right now. I'm like, no, don't say it, James. It's like that. That'll give away something. Yes.
Yep. And so it's like another little side note is like, I want to talk about this book, and then I want to circle back and talk about it with people in a more like private setting, because I want to know their experience of the books. And I just want to listen. Yeah. That's what I want to do. And or ask certain like kind of maybe not rhetorical, but just kind of open questions, because I think that there's just so much, so many possible interpretations of what goes on in the book. I mean,
easily.
Yeah.
So we kind of touched on it a little bit. Just what is it? I would say an elevator statement. What is the book about? What can we say the book is about? What would you say the book is about?
Yeah, well, as I said before, the book opens at the beginning of the internet era. We talked a little bit about identity.
Yes.
And thinking about these kinds of questions that any person that is of that age, no matter what their background is, has these coming of age kind of questions about identity. But imagine that you didn't have your family around. Imagine you only had their ghosts around to kind of, and their stories that kind of haunt you as you're trying to figure these things out. The story opens up, and the last person in her life has just disappeared.
Yes, Alma. She's a ghost of the book, so to speak, throughout the whole book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So Kat, the main character, is kind of haunted and wonders, why did this happen? Where did all the people go? So and then all of a sudden, maybe some flick of the wrist from a magic realist writer's sort of way, she finds herself in New York City. And she's telling her story to a new companion.
Yes.
And she's attempting to kind of figure out why she's there in New York. And the way that she's kind of sorting through that is by telling the stories at first of her family, and kind of this more removed way of telling the story now, because she's almost more analytical about how these stories were told to her over the years.
Mentioning her aunt, making sure her father, all these things she's met. Yeah, that's what I said. It felt dreamy. It felt like she was like creating these scenarios for us.
Right.
To follow.
Right. But, you know, like, so she's telling the story to a lover of hers. And, you know, she goes through all this family history that mostly takes place in Northern and Central California. And, you know, and it goes all the way back to like turn of the century. I mean, we're talking the turn of the 20th century. So, I mean, I bit off a lot in 80,000 words. But, you know, like, this is what Kat demanded to deal with. You know, this is, you know, real history intertwined with this history of this young lady. But, you know, a series of these mysterious injuries that keep happening to Kat throughout the book kind of forced her to kind of be a little bit more honest or forthright about what, or maybe she's just discovering herself. I kind of leave that up to the reader to decide, like, how much is she just holding back and how much is she just not thought about, or ever, you know, is she just discovering these things now?
Oh, okay, so I want to jump in. So without getting, okay, don't get me started. How do I say this? I want to say, you just said something that triggered me in a good way, in a bad way, triggered you. I think I can say this. In my opinion, right, I'm not going to give anything away. In my opinion, she was young. She had no reason to think about this stuff. She had no reason. She was young. I mean, you're young. I mean, 19 years old, I didn't think about stuff. Not so much. I mean, I thought about stuff later in my life, but when you're young, you're just going through life, whatever. I feel like the situation happened to her, which kind of forced her to start looking at stuff. And I feel like throughout the book, I'm being very careful as I say this, throughout the book, I did another book the other day, and it's the same thing. We're like, okay, how do we say this? How do we say it? Let's say it. Hopefully, it's getting people who are watching to really get the book, because I guess there's some good stuff in there. I just want to say, okay, so back to that. My feeling is she had no reason to think about it because she was just young, it's just youth. Now she's kind of growing up, but she's also continually searching. And through these stories, certain realizations are happening. And I feel like that's life. I mean, we're always searching. We're always searching. But it's not until something happens where we're kind of forced to almost look at it, or we're not forced, we could choose to look at it or not look at it. She's looking at it, she's relaying these stories to her person, and she's realizing stuff. And it's interesting the way she tells the stories, because there's this one, I'm not really giving this away, there's one part where you're like, Papa, Jose, whatever, like his name is like, it's just all these different, she's describing him in a situation. It's like, it sounds like a 19-year-old would say it that way kind of thing. So you captured that, in my opinion. But I feel like, not giving too much away, the thing you just said, I feel like she's now realizing stuff along the way as she's relating these stories that were told to her, that she just had no reason to think about before. She had just no reason, it was like, well, I've never thought about it before. And now she's in that mode she's in search mode. She's in this, I was there at some point. I found out a few things and I was like searching and, almost like searching for the meaning of life, so to speak, or whatever. I mean, I feel like that's what Miss Cat, is going throughout the book. So so everybody, I'm sure people may have their own interpretations, but I feel like that's how I read it. I didn't give anything away. That's how I read it.
James, there's we should probably just shut off the camera now because there's so many other ways we can go.
I know. Well, we're gonna start wrapping up the interview because it's getting towards the end of the podcast. But I think what's great you said. I want people really to go. Well, now I want to read the book because I want to know what they're talking about. That's what I want you guys to come there and just go in there, because I like books that make you think. Something everybody does. Some people like there's none wrong. Writers for everybody. I read all kinds of books, and some books I want you to think. They want you to think. And this book is really about familial relationships. It's about loss. It's about searching. It's about the friendship. It's about all kind of stuff. And it's all in there. And the stories are not secondary to her, but it's like, and I'm not in the book, but it's like I'm feeling her when she's telling the stories. I'm still feeling going, she's talking about these different things, and she's totally forefront. The stories are, I mean, they're not a backdrop, but it's like you could feel her as she's telling stories. Maybe because it's first person, maybe that could be it. But just I feel like throughout, it's like she disappears, the stories happen, and she comes back in. It's like, no, she's there, she's present, even when she's telling the story.
Yep. You got it, man. You got it. That's exactly,
like I say,
you know, like I'll couch these in certain terms, but
yes,
I'm happy that you got that out of the book, you know, like that was your reading of the book. And I'm not going to say, again, I'm not going to say one way or the other, because everybody should come to this book with, you know, with, all I'm asking is just to come to it with an open mind. Because there's some weird stuff that happens. You might need to take a little extra time because it's not a beach read by any means.
No, not at all. Not at all. No.
You know, but I'm all right with that. I'm not going to appeal to everybody, but you know, I'm also, you know, doing what I can to kind of make myself available to talk about the things, or more honestly, to listen, because I do believe that there are some heavy topics in here that, you know, some people might react to, and I do definitely want to hear and leave space for that kind of conversation. And the dedication of the book is really very conscious. It was, you know, going to be a different dedication, but, you know, as I kind of made my way through the final drafts, I'm like, this has got to be the dedication. And then, you know, the author's note at the end is really something that I find that I think is really important to include, just because of, like I said, the kind of, I don't want to make myself out to be more important or whatever, but like I take some risks in this book, and I just, all I ask from the reader is to take a risk and read and ask questions, but also come to it with an open mind. But have questions, write to me on my website. I've got a page there that you can contact me. Also, you can go to the homepage where you have all the different ways you can buy the book. See, I know, I studied, I know how to do this.
Very good, good man.
But the homepage has some buttons you can click. I always encourage people to buy locally when they can. You can do that by just calling up your local bookstore, and they will be able to order it through IndieBound. And if you don't have a local bookstore, maybe go look for one. But if not, buy it on Amazon, buy it on Barnes & Noble. All those links are active on my homepage, my webpage. And I do a little bit of writing, kind of a little bit more recently. It's just been writing about my experience of this whole publication process, which I'd be happy to come back and talk about. It's been quite a trip, but I know we're running low on time. Yeah. But man, anytime you want, we can talk literature. I love it, and I don't do it enough anymore. I will say that my wife is a champion, because she has listened to me talk about this book for for the time that we've been together, which has been 13 years. I've been working on the book, or worked on the book, for 19 years. You know, over this course of 19 years with times off, but labor of love. You know, I could not deny this voice a chance to come out, and it's just been such an amazing experience.
Yeah. What is the website? Get to know what the website is. Where can they go?
Yes. NickHolmbergWrites.com.
We're gonna make sure that's in the description, of course, so you guys can go there for more information.
Yeah, and my social media links. I don't do Twitter. I will never do Twitter.
Especially now.
Well, they're all pretty terrible, but but you know, I did just post today on my author page on Facebook the soundtrack to the novel, which the novel has, as you know, lots of mentions of music.
Yes, it does.
Specific songs.
Yes.
Specific artists. And it's a pretty weird little mix up, but it actually ends up being 3 hours and 48 minutes long.
Okay.
And it could be longer if I included the entire, you know, symphonies, but I only included like one segment of each symphony that I mentioned. So,
okay.
But But I'll post some others. Like I also have a couple, and the Spotify is public, so you guys can go and check out some of those playlists. But there's another one that I have that I listened to just incessantly as I was in the last stages, last couple of years of writing and rewriting. And it just like, it's the well-worn groove, just this ritual that I got in, wake up before anybody else is up and, sit down at my computer, carved out that 1 hour at a time, because that's all I had in any given day during the week, but I had to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes even earlier, if I just, couldn't sleep any longer, get up at 4 instead of 5, and let's work 2 hours instead of 1 before work. But, just getting into that routine, but the music is really where it's at. And that's, again, I'm probably going to write about that pretty soon as well on the website, but it's just, it's fun to kind of let people peek behind the process. And we didn't even get a chance to talk about that yet. And again, I will come back and talk about that specifically.
Yeah, you have to come back. You have to come back.
It has changed over time,
Yeah, I would do 2-3 hour podcasts. No one would listen. It's all the time, even though I find it interesting, but no one, they're tune out. So yes, you have to come back because that's what this show's about, the process, all that stuff. And I love that, here's the thing. I always say I'm creating the world I want to see. So in all this kind of stuff, I like that you have the music, you have this. I feel like we're creating the world you want to see, this world that you're putting together. And I think that's something that's very important. And a lot of followers and fans, they love that stuff. They love it. They want to come into the world with you. They want to know what's going on with you and how you felt about this and what this means and what that means. And I love that song. And some people paint along with their books. Some people do. There's all kinds of people do. Do other dance things, dance interpretations, all kind of art stuff, and support the arts, folks.
Yeah. One other quick note kind of on what you were just talking about right there, and I wanted to share this too. It's kind of a little bit of a dream of mine, but there's all these characters that come in and out of the book and they disappear.
Any spin-offs?
I'm not giving away anything there,
no.
But they all disappear. But, kind of what I'm hoping what would be really cool is to inspire writers to pick up where they think
I like that,
where the story left off, and I really think that's for any character. And I actually have one in mind for one of the characters. I'm not even going to tell you, but I'm going to write it.
Okay. Well, I did that with somebody else's. They did a graphic novel, and there's just one character graphic novel. I was like, I keep staring at this person, and so I wrote a spin-off story. And the original author was like so happy, like, oh my, it's so funny. And I had this whole thing, and I did that. So now, I have an audio drama, folks out there, speaking of that, called Jetboy, which is a spinoff of Airboy, which was the comics from the 40s. It's public domain. And I fell in love with the comics. The last set of comics were done in the 80s. And I made a grandson of Airboy. And if you want to, it was a huge hit for us here on JLJ Media. I made it as an audio drama. I didn't do it as a graphic novel. I did a whole different medium. And it was a huge hit for us, and folks are loving it. And you want us to Jetboy on JLJ Media on any streaming service. Basically what you said, I took a character, gave him a son. He's the grandson of and so we're tying it together kind of. And I love that kind of stuff. So you just said that. I believe in that completely. Like, why not? Because we're all connected. That's the whole point. We're all connected.
And there's plenty of space for people to do that in anything really. But I really kind of strive to leave that space for anybody who wants to pick up on any of these stories of these characters and say, well, that guy was interesting. What the hell was that all about? We only know like just a sliver of him. I want to write his story. Like, how did he get to be that way that he was depicted in this book?
The Emergent.
I'm gonna have to send you.
I did a physical copy. All I have is the PDF. I don't have a physical copy.
Yeah, I will send it to you. This is this cover is awesome. I
love it. I love the color and everything. I love it.
Couldn't be more happy. But yeah, definitely. This has been great, James. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. And anytime, obviously we're going to stay in touch. But anytime you want to have me back on, I'm happy to come back on and chat.
Very good. And folks, like I said, I'm a big proponent of bookstores also. So, and a lot of cities have bookstores. Here in LA, we have the Last Bookstore. We have Book Soup. We have a bunch of places that are local here in Los Angeles. So I agree with them. I'm a total shop local person also. But if you can't, if your city doesn't have one, I'm sure many cities don't have them, then go to Amazon, folks. You do it on your phone, your tablet. You don't have to go nowhere. Just buy the book. Buy the book.
Yes.
I'm James Lott Jr. And of course, we love books here. Reading it is fundamental, as we say. We do love it here. This podcast is on every audio streaming service you can think of, from iHeartRadio to Spotify, Apple, Google, Deezer, Podbean, wherever. Just in between the pages with my name, James Lott Jr., 2 T's, not one. Where I have over 61 books, so it's kind of a weird thing. I started the Really Short Story Project. I have co-writers. I write books of my own. We write books together. So check all the buy books, buy them, Kindle, whatever, buy them out there. And this show is also on my online network, JLJ Media. You can follow us on YouTube. Yes, we're there. And I'm also on I'm on everything. I'm on TikTok. I'm a TikTok star, apparently. I'm on everything. So follow me everywhere for all kinds of goodies. Get his book, Nicholas Holmberg, get his book. And we'll see you next time.